14 Golden Age stars who ruined their own careers. Hollywood's Golden Age looked perfect from the outside. The stars were glamorous, rich, and adored by millions. But behind the cameras, many of them were slowly destroying their own careers. Some couldn't handle fame. Others made reckless choices, trusted the wrong people, or let addiction take control. Today, we're looking at 14 Golden Age stars who had everything: talent, fame, opportunity, and still lost it. Not because of bad luck, but because of their own actions. Judy Garland. Judy Garland's career is one of the clearest examples of how Hollywood's studio system could create a star while quietly destroying the person behind it. Signed by MGM as a child, Garland was groomed from an early age to be a reliable box office asset rather than a developing human being. Her breakout role as Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz in 1939 turned her into a national treasure before she had even reached adulthood. And throughout the 1940s, she remained one of MGM's most valuable performers. Films such as Meet Me in St. Louis, 1944, Easter Parade, 1948, and Summer Stock, 1950, cemented her reputation as a gifted singer and emotional screen presence. She was praised not for glamour, but for sincerity, vulnerability, and an ability to convey longing that resonated deeply with audiences. Behind the scenes, however, Garland was subjected to relentless physical and emotional pressure. MGM tightly controlled her weight, appearance, and schedule, placing her on a cycle of amphetamines to keep her energetic during the day and barbiturates to force sleep at night. This drug regimen began when she was still a teenager and continued for years, normalizing chemical dependence long before she understood the consequences. As expectations mounted, Garland struggled with anxiety, depression, and chronic exhaustion, issues that were treated as inconveniences rather than warning signs. By the late 1940s, Garland's dependence on drugs and alcohol had grown severe. She became increasingly unreliable, missing rehearsals, arriving late to sets, and clashing with studio executives. In 1950, MGM terminated her contract, citing unprofessional behavior, a devastating blow after more than a decade with the studio. Although Garland achieved a major comeback with A Star Is Born in 1954, her personal stability never fully returned. Financial troubles, failed marriages, and repeated hospitalizations followed. Her extraordinary talent endured, but her health did not. In 1969, after years of physical decline and emotional turmoil, Judy Garland died from an accidental overdose at the age of 47, a casualty of both her own struggles and an industry that had used her up far too young. Montgomery Clift. Montgomery Clift emerged in the late 1940s as a striking contrast to the traditional Hollywood leading man. Clift's collaboration with directors such as George Stevens and Fred Zinnemann, as well as his close professional and personal bond with Elizabeth Taylor, placed him at the very center of Hollywood's creative elite during the early 1950s. At his peak, he was regarded as one of the most serious actors of his generation, capable of conveying inner torment with remarkable subtlety. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Clift struggled privately with profound emotional conflict. He battled alcoholism and became increasingly dependent on prescription drugs, issues that were compounded by the pressures of fame and his inability to openly reconcile his personal identity within the restrictive moral climate of the era. These struggles came to a breaking point in May 1957, when Clift was involved in a devastating car accident after leaving a dinner party at Elizabeth Taylor's home. The crash left his face permanently scarred and caused extensive physical damage, but the psychological consequences were even more severe. His already fragile self-confidence deteriorated, and his reliance on alcohol and painkillers intensified in the years that followed. After the accident, Clift's career entered a slow and irreversible decline. Once known for his discipline and intensity, he became increasingly withdrawn, erratic, and physically unwell on set. Although he continued to deliver powerful performances, including an Academy Award-nominated role in Judgment at Nuremberg, 1961, he was no longer able to sustain leading man status. Studios grew wary of his health and reliability, and he was largely confined to supporting roles. By the mid-1960s, Clift was living in near isolation, his body weakened by years of substance abuse. He died of a heart attack in 1966 at the age of 45, leaving behind a legacy of immense talent overshadowed by personal destruction and a career that never recovered from the damage he could not overcome. Errol Flynn. Errol Flynn's career decline stands as one of the most dramatic self-inflicted collapses of Hollywood's golden age. At the height of his fame, Flynn possessed everything the studio system valued: effortless charisma, physical confidence, and a screen presence that made audiences believe in heroism. Yet, it was precisely the persona that made him famous that eventually consumed him. Flynn treated stardom not as a profession to be protected, but as a license for excess. As his reputation for wild living grew, so did his inability to function within the disciplined structure required to sustain a long-term film career. Off-screen, Flynn devoted himself to indulgence on a scale that few of his contemporaries could match. His lifestyle revolved around constant drinking, drug use, and sexual excess, habits that quickly began to bleed into his professional life. He became known for arriving on set intoxicated, forgetting lines, and antagonizing directors and crew members. What had once been dismissed as roguish charm slowly hardened into a pattern of unreliability. Studios that had once built entire productions around his image began to view him as a liability rather than an asset. The public scandals that followed accelerated this decline. The highly publicized statutory rape trial, despite ending in acquittal, permanently damaged Flynn's reputation. The image of the carefree romantic hero was replaced by suspicion and moral outrage, and the scandal marked a turning point in how the industry and the public perceived him. Flynn responded not with restraint, but with greater recklessness. His substance abuse intensified, and attempts to curb his drinking were short-lived, often followed by severe withdrawal symptoms that further impaired his ability to work. Financial mismanagement compounded the damage. Flynn spent extravagantly on real estate, failed business ventures, and ill-advised independent film projects that collapsed before completion. His attempt to self-finance a grand historical epic proved disastrous, draining his remaining resources and destroying any illusion that he could control his own career outside the studio system. As his health deteriorated and his appearance aged prematurely, leading roles disappeared. By the time he accepted supporting or foreign productions, his star power had all but evaporated. Flynn's career did not fade quietly. It unraveled publicly, driven by unchecked excess, poor judgment, and a refusal to acknowledge that the very behavior he romanticized was erasing the career that had made him famous. Orson Welles. Orson's career decline is a study in how extraordinary talent can be undermined by an uncompromising temperament and a refusal to navigate the commercial realities of Hollywood. After the monumental success of his debut, Welles appeared to have the world at his feet. He was young, brilliant, and promised creative control by the studio system, a rare privilege in an industry dominated by rigid hierarchies and profit-driven executives. His first film not only cemented his status as a visionary, but also created enormous expectations for every project that followed. Yet, it was precisely his insistence on total artistic control that eventually alienated the very industry that had elevated him. The turning point came when his follow-up project was drastically altered by the studio. A substantial portion of the film was cut and re-edited without his consent, resulting in a product that Welles could not recognize or endorse. Outraged, he publicly disowned the work, but the damage had already been done. The studio labeled him difficult and unreliable, casting a shadow over his professional reputation. In the eyes of Hollywood executives, Welles had become a risk, a brilliant mind incapable of functioning within the collaborative and financially constrained framework required for mainstream filmmaking. What had once been an asset, his perfectionism and audacity now counted against him. Rather than compromise, Welles withdrew from the Hollywood system and spent much of his subsequent career working in Europe, taking on projects that allowed greater creative freedom but offered little mainstream visibility. Even when he returned to American cinema, he struggled to secure projects with significant studio backing. Many of his later films, though artistically lauded, were underfunded and struggled to reach wide audiences, forcing him to fund projects through commercial work and television appearances. His career became a patchwork of intermittent successes, overshadowed by lost opportunities. The very genius that had launched him to fame became the barrier to sustaining a conventional career. Welles's insistence on uncompromising artistry, coupled with repeated clashes with studio executives, transformed a once promising trajectory into a life of fragmented projects and professional exile, illustrating how a towering ego and refusal to play by the rules of Hollywood could derail even the most extraordinary talent. Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando was admired for bringing raw emotion and realism to the screen, transforming acting with his natural style and brooding intensity. Early on, he was unstoppable. His performances drew massive audiences and critical praise, and studios eagerly built films around his presence. But over time, the very qualities that made him exceptional began to work against him. As his fame grew, Brando became increasingly difficult to work with. He often challenged directors, refused to follow scripts, and demanded rewrites to suit his interpretation. While this sometimes elevated his performances, it also caused delays, cost overruns, and tensions on set. Large productions became stressful for everyone involved, and Brando's unpredictability started to scare studios away. Even some of his most anticipated projects suffered because he insisted on controlling everything from dialogue to pacing. This reputation for being uncooperative gradually reduced the number of major studio offers he received. At the same time, Brando made several high-profile career decisions that limited his long-term success. He turned down roles that might have solidified his legacy even further, choosing smaller or more controversial projects instead. Some of these films were artistically interesting but commercially unsuccessful, and they did little to maintain his status as a top box office star. Brando also took on roles that required him to direct or heavily shape the film himself, which added stress and sometimes backfired. His focus on prestige and personal expression often came at the expense of broader audience appeal. Even when Brando returned to a major, career-defining role, years of missed opportunities and studio distrust had already taken their toll. He remained a brilliant actor, capable of unforgettable performances, but his career never regained the steady momentum it could have had. Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe's decline was the result of both the pressures of fame and her own reliance on unhealthy coping mechanisms. At her peak, she was Hollywood's ultimate blonde bombshell, commanding audiences with her charisma, charm, and striking beauty. But behind the glamour, Monroe struggled with deep anxiety and chronic insomnia. To manage the stress, she turned to heavy sedatives and alcohol, creating a cycle of dependency that increasingly affected her professional life. Film sets became difficult environments. She frequently arrived late or exhausted, struggled to memorize lines, or walked out of interviews and shoots. Directors and co-stars who had once admired her creativity began to see her as unreliable. Her behavior was not driven by laziness, but by the pressures of being constantly scrutinized and expected to maintain perfection in public while dealing with private insecurities. Projects that could have further solidified her career were canceled or left incomplete because studios could no longer count on her to perform consistently. By the end of her life, Monroe's workload had almost entirely disappeared, and she had ceased making new films. The combination of substance abuse emotional fragility, and erratic behavior meant that she could not sustain the career she had built, despite her immense talent and fame. Tragically, her death from a barbiturate overdose ended any chance of recovery or comeback. Her story highlights how fame, personal vulnerability, and self-destructive habits can derail even the most promising careers, leaving behind a legacy of both brilliance and loss. Louise Rayner. Louise Rayner's rapid rise in Hollywood masked the fragility of her professional relationships. She achieved extraordinary success early, winning consecutive Best Actress Oscars. But this also set impossibly high expectations. Studios assumed she would remain a major star for years, yet Rayner quickly became dissatisfied with the roles she was offered. She refused supporting parts and often turned down contracts, demonstrating a stubborn unwillingness to endure projects that did not meet her standards. Rather than negotiating carefully within the studio system, she chose defiance. Her pride and impatience alienated executives, who had no tolerance for stars unwilling to follow the carefully constructed Hollywood path. MGM, once her champion, grew frustrated with her demands and perceived ingratitude, ultimately letting her walk away from the industry. By leaving Hollywood at the height of her fame, she effectively ended her career, forfeiting opportunities that could have kept her in the spotlight for decades. Rayner's brief but intense time in Hollywood serves as a reminder that talent alone is not enough. Her self-imposed exit illustrates how personal choices, inflexibility, and a desire for immediate control can prematurely close doors that once seemed wide open. Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin's career decline was largely the result of his refusal to compromise on personal and political matters. After years of unparalleled success as a filmmaker and performer, he faced accusations of communist sympathies that alarmed both the public and industry executives. Rather than attempt to appease the critics or compromise his values, Chaplin chose to leave the United States and live in Europe. This voluntary exile effectively removed him from Hollywood at a time when he could have continued creating films for American audiences. His absence led to a loss of influence and visibility in the industry. In the United States, his films were withdrawn, and he was publicly vilified, erasing much of the prestige he had accumulated. Meanwhile, the personal scandals in his life, highly publicized marriages, divorces, and relationships fueled negative publicity and further complicated his reputation. Even as Chaplin continued to make films abroad, he was no longer at the center of mainstream American cinema. The combination of political defiance and personal choices created a gap of nearly a decade in which his career in Hollywood was effectively frozen. His later recognition and critical reassessment could not fully repair the disruption caused by decisions that prioritized principle over practical career considerations. Mickey Rooney. Mickey Rooney's career unraveling was closely linked to the chaos of his personal life. A child prodigy and teen star, he was beloved for his versatility, charm, and musical ability, becoming one of Hollywood's highest-paid performers. Yet, the same energy and intensity that made him a star also contributed to personal excess. Rooney developed destructive habits, including heavy drinking, drug use, and compulsive gambling. He squandered large sums of money, accrued extensive debt, and repeatedly declared bankruptcy, creating instability that directly affected his professional prospects. Military service interrupted his career at a crucial time, and upon returning, the Hollywood landscape had shifted. Studios that once relied on him as a box office guarantee saw him as unreliable and difficult to manage. He was relegated to smaller character roles, occasional television appearances, and stage work, losing the central status he had once commanded. His reputation for extravagance, financial mismanagement, and chaotic personal behavior overshadowed his professional accomplishments, making studios hesitant to entrust him with major projects. Even his later years were marked by financial instability. He lost his fortune, struggled with taxes, and remained publicly open about his tumultuous lifestyle, never fully expressing regret for the choices that had diminished his career. Rooney's story illustrates the danger of excessive indulgence impulsive decisions, and failure to manage personal life alongside professional obligations. Despite early brilliance, he was unable to maintain the trajectory that had made him a household name, ultimately leaving behind a career defined as much by self-inflicted setbacks as by his undeniable talent. Jayne Mansfield. Jayne Mansfield's career decline stemmed largely from her deliberate embrace of spectacle over substance. She became a star through her stunning looks, charisma, and calculated media presence, generating headlines with every appearance and stunt. At first, this strategy elevated her profile, but over time, the focus on publicity began to overshadow her acting capabilities. Studios became wary of offering her serious roles because her persona dominated public perception more than her craft. After being dropped by major studios, Mansfield continued to court attention through controversial performances and revealing publicity. She starred in a provocative film that shocked audiences and was banned in some regions, further cementing her image as a sensational figure rather than a serious actress. While this maintained her visibility, it effectively removed her from the mainstream cinematic path. She transitioned into low-budget productions, European exploitation films, and stage burlesque shows. By focusing on sexual spectacle and attention-grabbing antics, she limited her professional credibility and opportunities for substantial film roles. Mansfield's choices demonstrate how self-created images, when prioritized over consistent performance, can derail a career. Her early fame, once promising, was gradually replaced by association with controversy and scandal. By the end of her life, she had been effectively excluded from the kind of mainstream projects that could have maintained her star status. Mansfield's story highlights the tension between media-driven persona and sustained professional achievement, showing how a focus on image over craft can sabotage even a bright career. Ingrid Bergman. Ingrid Bergman's voluntary choices created one of Hollywood's most famous self-imposed exiles. She had built a career marked by elegance, professionalism, and talent, becoming one of the most respected actresses of her generation. However, her decision to leave her family in the United States for an affair with an Italian director caused public outrage and professional backlash. She gave birth to a child out of wedlock, further intensifying criticism. The scandal had immediate consequences. She was condemned in Congress, banned from television, boycotted by studios, and ostracized by Hollywood's establishment. Projects were canceled or withheld, and for several years, she was effectively unable to work in the U.S. Bergman relocated to Europe, continuing her acting career there, but her American phase, the segment that had defined her fame and influence, was effectively halted. This self-imposed separation from Hollywood cost her momentum and visibility at a time when her influence could have remained at its peak. Although she later returned to Hollywood and enjoyed critical success, the lost years had a lasting effect. Bergman's story illustrates how personal decisions, even those rooted in desire or self-fulfillment, can have profound professional consequences. Her voluntary exile demonstrates that fame and success can be highly fragile, especially when industry perception and public morality play a major role in determining opportunities. Bergman eventually regained respect, but only after years of professional and personal isolation imposed largely by her own choices. Tallulah Bankhead. Tallulah Bankhead's professional decline was largely self-inflicted, shaped by her excessive lifestyle and public persona. Known for her vibrant stage presence and husky voice, she enjoyed enormous fame on Broadway and in radio, but her behavior often overshadowed her talent. Bankhead's reliance on alcohol and drugs, coupled with her flamboyant and scandalous reputation, made her unpredictable and difficult to hire for film roles. Her refusal to moderate her lifestyle or temper her eccentricities alienated studios and producers. While she remained a captivating figure in the public imagination, opportunities for substantial film work gradually disappeared. The very antics that made her fascinating, extravagant parties, scandalous affairs, and attention-seeking behavior also limited her professional credibility. By the 1950s, She had become more notorious than celebrated, with roles drying up and her reputation defined more by infamy than skill. Bankhead's career decline illustrates the dangers of unbridled indulgence and lack of discipline. Talent alone was insufficient to sustain a career when coupled with excessive personal behaviors. Her life serves as a cautionary tale. Public fascination cannot replace the consistency, professionalism, and adaptability needed to maintain long-term success in the film industry. Her brilliance remained, but her choices ensured that she was remembered as much for chaos as for artistry. Buster Keaton. Buster Keaton's career unraveling is a lesson in the dangers of surrendering creative control. Already a giant of silent film, he was known for his physical comedy, precise timing, and innovative visual storytelling. His films were carefully constructed, with every gag planned in advance and executed with mathematical precision. Audiences admired him not just as a performer, but as a filmmaker who understood how to use the camera itself as part of the joke. This independence allowed Keaton to create work that was unlike anything else in early cinema, and for a time, it placed him among the most respected artists in Hollywood. That foundation collapsed when he agreed to work within the rigid studio system. Under studio control, Keaton was no longer allowed to write or direct his own material. Scripts were handed to him, jokes were softened for mass appeal, and his carefully crafted physical comedy was replaced with safer, formulaic scenes. The studio demanded speed and efficiency rather than experimentation, and Keaton struggled to adapt. His early sound films failed to connect with audiences who had loved his silent work, and critics noted the absence of the creative spark that once defined his films. The loss of control drained both his confidence and his motivation. At the same time, Keaton's personal life was collapsing. His marriage ended bitterly. He lost custody of his children, and his financial stability disappeared. Alcohol became a coping mechanism, worsening his professional unreliability. As his behavior became more erratic, studios lost patience and eventually cut ties with him altogether. Once celebrated as a master filmmaker, Keaton was reduced to accepting minor acting roles, uncredited writing work, and short-term contracts simply to survive. For decades, he existed on the margins of Hollywood, watching an industry he helped build move on without him. His decline was not caused by a lack of talent, but by a combination of poor decisions and circumstances he could not manage. Only late in life did critics and filmmakers begin to fully acknowledge his influence, honoring him as a pioneer of cinematic comedy. By then, however, much of his career had already been lost. Keaton's story remains a powerful example of how giving up artistic freedom, especially at the wrong moment, can permanently alter even the most promising career. Vivien Leigh. Vivien Leigh's professional decline was deeply tied to her mental health struggles. Known for commanding performances as Scarlett O'Hara and Blanche DuBois, she captivated audiences with intensity and skill. Yet, behind the acclaim, Leigh battled bipolar disorder, which caused unpredictable behavior, absences from work, and repeated hospitalizations. Her health issues interfered with filming schedules and her ability to reliably complete projects. Studios grew hesitant to hire her, concerned about potential disruptions and the unpredictability she brought to sets. Personal turmoil, including marital difficulties with Laurence Olivier, further complicated her career. By the mid-1960s, her film work had all but ceased, leaving her largely absent from the medium where she had once shone brightest. Even though she revived her stage career sporadically, the interruptions and unreliability caused by illness prevented her from sustaining a consistent presence in film. The brilliance of her early work became overshadowed by absences and professional uncertainty. Leigh's story is a reminder that even extraordinary talent can be curtailed by health struggles, particularly when the industry is unwilling or unable to accommodate an artist's personal limitations. Her legacy remains remarkable, but her career trajectory was undeniably shaped by forces she could not fully control, leaving a permanent mark on the Hollywood record. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more real stories from Hollywood's past.